Okay, I'm back with another Lil Durk courthouse update, even though I'm not at the courthouse. Now, you hopefully saw the last video I uploaded, all right? If you didn't see that video, okay, I'm having a bit of a bad day with this Durk stuff. I was at the courthouse for Lil Durk's hearing. I got all the information. I was going to split this into two videos that I was going to film at the courthouse. The camera overheated. There was wind. I got chased off the block by a security guard. There was a lot, okay? There was a lot going on. But basically, all right, I'm back here, all right, in my studio, and I'm going to be breaking down the next part of what went down in court, okay? And I got my spot stickers on because I'm having the breakout of all breakouts. I'm having a tough day today, all right? But unfortunately, I'm not having as tough of a day as Durk because it wasn't the best news for him in court today. There were some silver linings, but really it was a grey cloud, if I'm completely honest with you, okay? So, like I normally do with my courthouse reports, okay, I got a whole new notebook and everything. I filled up my last notebook, all right? This is my old notebook, absolutely full to the brim of David notes. I'm on to notebook number 2 now, and by the time David goes to trial, we're probably going to be on notebook number 3 or 4. But I'm going to read you everything that I've got from my notes for this second part of the video. So if you saw the last video, you'll know that, you know, Durk, the judge really wasn't playing ball when it came to limiting the songs that could be played. Specifically, the song Pissed Me Off, which is a pretty self-incriminating song. It was a song that was recorded and released before the murder of Lil Pab, which is the murder for hire, the LA murder that Durk is on trial for. But it really does, I mean, allegedly, it seemingly does show a lot of intent, okay? So I broke all of that down in that previous video. In this video, I'm going to move on to the next part, which was essentially a few different motions, but most importantly, it was basically this motion to try and have the cell phone evidence thrown out. If you saw the previous reporting that I did on this, you'll know that there was essentially, you know, a Lil Durk mobile phone, an iPhone, that was seized in 2021 when Durk was the victim of a home invasion. Now, if you want to know more about that home invasion, go and watch any of the many videos that I've done, the fall of OTF, the Atlanta secret gang war. Basically, Durk and OTF were low-key raising hell in Atlanta, allegedly, all right? They're saying King Von's sister got her chain took. There was a shootout at a shopping mall. There was allegedly a bounty on that chain, and they were trying to say that that chain was nearly sold back to some of Durk's people through Lil Baby's crew, and Lil Baby's crew didn't want to play ball, and everything was just a mess. There was a shooting at the mall. So this home invasion with Lil Durk allegedly was more to do with all the nonsense that he was getting into in Atlanta rather than the GD gang war back in Chicago, and also completely separate to the Quando Rondo, Lil Tim, King Von death narrative as well. Durk had beasts going on all fronts, and then, like, bro, I could tell you about other deadly beasts that Durk had going on separate to this whole thing. Just go and watch the years and years of reporting that I've done on that. But essentially, okay, I'm going to tell you specifically in this video about this phone. So Durk's phone was taken from him after this home invasion at his house. Some people entered his home. He claimed that India grabbed a gun, was going to shoot at the people, dropped the gun. He picked up the phone. He claimed to the cops that he fired in the air as the home invaders were fleeing. Now, look, I respect that, and I think that you should be able to defend your home. You should be able to defend your wife, your safety, all that kind of thing. But he probably said the wrong thing when it came to the law enforcement, because him firing his gun into the air as the home invaders were fleeing, unfortunately, did give them probable cause to believe that maybe something wasn't quite right about the story. They initially had a warrant where they could basically search the home for anything the home invaders might have left behind while fleeing, but then when Durk told them that he fired into the air, they said they believe there might have been some reckless conduct that went on. They then got a search warrant for the whole home, and they were able to take things from the home, which included Durk's phone, and eventually, after I believe about 5 weeks, they were able to get a warrant for an extraction of the information on that phone. Now, that was the Georgia State Bureau of Investigation, the GBI. Like, the FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the GBI is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. They're like the FBI for Georgia. They were able to do an extraction on Durk's phone, but because the phone had been turned off before they took it, once it got turned back on, there's a thing called like a first opening. I can't remember the exact term for it, but it's basically like a first unlock extraction, which means that when you turn your phone on, if it's not been unlocked for the first time, there's limited information that you can get off that phone. So they were only able to get like images that were on that phone, screenshots that were saved on that phone, metadata for those images, but they weren't able to get all of the messages. Now, unfortunately for Durk, that phone had some very damning stuff. It had apparently screenshots of messages where they're talking about Lil Tim, the alleged killer of King Von, being released on bail, and attempts to find his address. We found out in court that those messages, the metadata said that though the screenshot of those messages that was recovered from the phone was days after Lil Tim was released on bail. There was allegedly screenshots of a concert flyer for Quando Rondo's concert in Waycross, Georgia on May the 1st, which, as we all know, he was shot up afterwards. They attempted to kill him after that. There was apparently also screenshots of messages that seemed to infer that they were discussing that shooting after it happened, all within days of these things happening. So the Georgia Bureau of Investigation got access to the phone, and they kept hold of that phone until today, basically. And despite trying to get the phone back, Durk never got the phone back. And in June of 2026, the feds were able to basically write a new search warrant looking for information on that phone. They were given that search warrant. They were granted that extraction from that phone, the same information, fair and square. Durk had basically been saying that he had had his rights violated by that phone being taken, by that phone being kept hold of so many times, and by that phone being now used for a different purpose than what it was taken for. So let's get to the notes of the courtroom now that you've got the context for all of that, and I'll tell you exactly what went down and essentially why this was an L for Durk. So he had a motion to suppress that evidence for that phone and that information on the phone not to be used. He wanted the contents of the phone to be suppressed. And the defense said when the phone came into possession in June 2026, the phone was still in its first unlock phase, so the data is limited to, they described it as thumbnails with metadata. Now, what's interesting is thumbnails is like an interesting way of just describing like a low quality image, but it sounds like they had enough quality on those images to like actually be able to work out what was going on in those images, you know. It's not like a really low resolution thumbnail. It sounds like a real clear image where they can see that there's a conversation about Lil Tim's address, right? So what's interesting is Durk's defense, they were trying to say, well, in light of these damning images, because it's just metadata, you don't have the conversations, you don't have the full context of what those images are, who took those images, who took those screenshots, who sent them to Durk. You don't even know what Durk said to them. Now, they didn't say this, but I inferred that what they were getting at with this was that potentially in absence of the context of the messages, they could say, oh, well, someone sent Durk this stuff. He didn't want nothing to do with it. He could have told him not to slide. But here's the thing. From what I understand, Durk and them, they're not handing over the passcode so that they can get full access to that phone. They're leaving it as it is. They got the metadata. So they're trying to get the metadata thrown out because there's no context, but they're not willing to give the passcode so that the state could get the context. Now, is my opinion, I would wager that perhaps the context of those messages is probably not good for Durk. So they want to suppress this. Now, they said that it's not fair to infer that Durk wanted to kill the victim just based on these images. We don't know the context of them. Now, they said that the government only requested, the federal government, the feds that are prosecuting this federal murder for hire case, they only requested that data a month ago. And they said that, you know, this basically, they said that, like, this for the same reason that the courts severed the different cases, that didn't quite make sense to me, but they basically said, look, we want to have our own expert inspect the phone. How can we defend these prejudicial exhibits if they're going to be taken out of context? And bear in mind, this phone was seized before Quando Rondo's cousin Lil Pab was killed in the LA murder for hire. And they basically said that this offends his due process. Now, the prosecution clapped back, and I've got to say, the prosecution did a really good job today. The last time we were in there, the prosecution were floundering a little bit. This time, they were super duper on point. The prosecution were wolves today, okay? So the prosecution gave some background on what they have, and this was not great for Durk. They said that the government and the FBI requested extraction data from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. So they said, first off, right, the extraction of the phone was created by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in 2021. It was a Cellbrite extraction, which is like a method of extraction that we've heard in the David hearings. They basically get a whole bunch of raw data from the phone, and then they can interpret it and create a report and work out what was on the phone. This has been produced to the defense. That's what the prosecution said. They said the defense has got all of this. They know what we got from that phone. They said the phone itself, nobody has been able to unlock the phone or get into the phone or get hold of the phone. It sounds like the phone is still in the possession of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. I could have that wrong, but it sounds like the phone is still in possession of the Georgia authorities. And they said the phone was in its pre-first unlock stage. It said the extraction software can only get a limited set of data from this. They said the GBI did an extraction. It was called a BFU extraction, I think it was called. And they said, and that type of extraction is limited in the amount of information they can get. Now, they said that this goes to, look, I'm not a lawyer, okay, but they said this goes to weight, not admissibility. And they said that the physical phone is there. The physical phone is there. They had the phone. They wrote a search warrant for a full extraction of the phone. But as it currently stands, they've not been able to get access to everything on the phone. And remember that, because that's going to be important later. The prosecution said if the defense gave them a passcode, they could unlock the phone and examine everything. They said the defense can inspect the BNW extraction. Is it BNW or BFW extraction that's basically being offered to them if they want to walk them through, the information that's in there. They said, look, we'll happily sit down with you and walk you through what we found on the phone. If you guys want to give us some context to what's on the phone, be my guest. Or you could give us access to the whole phone if you're saying that the context will change everything. But the prosecution said that the fact that these images are on Durk's phone at all, regardless of the context, is by its nature incriminating. They basically said that the images on the phone that belongs to Durk are incriminating itself. The screenshots discussing trying to get Lil Tim's address was metadata pinpointed to be days after Lil Tim's release. The screenshots related to Quando Rondo shows was within days of the shooting that happened after the show. And the judge basically kind of gave his thoughts on it. They said, look, I'm kind of like, the judge was sort of feeling what the prosecution was saying. So the judge basically said, look, the government has the right to get that information off the phone, and there's no time limit on that. Just because it's 5 years and it's been sat there because they had probable cause on Durk back in the day, and the phone sat there, and now the feds are saying, oh, someone's been murdered, can we check out what's on that phone? He said that's fair and square. He basically said, look, now they have the extraction, now they have the phone, it's done, it is what it is. They said the defense can examine the phone if they like. They said we can put this evidence, up to trial. He even said that, look, if the defense need more time to look at what was found on that phone because it was introduced so late, we could put this evidence at the very end of the trial so they have more time to try and go over it and decide how they want to approach it, which I thought was very, very forgiving and lenient, really, to offer them that, to say, well, to do you a favor, we'll put this at the end. But he didn't indicate that he was willing to have it thrown out. So that was really interesting. So after that, they said, look, the government can basically put this information forward and the defense can question it, but they can't exclude it. He said, we're not running the exclusion right now. That's not how it's going to go. The judge asked the defense, what is the good faith exception? What is your argument in good faith that you can exclude this? Because they got warrants fair and square. What is your actual argument as to why this shouldn't be included? Because they were properly done warrants. They didn't, just because it looks bad and it took 5 years and it was a loose end you guys forgot about, it seemed like they did this properly. So the defense replied, they said the cops only authorized to check the devices. Originally, they were only authorized to look at evidence that the perpetrators of the home invasion left behind. Now, the judge clapped back. They said, well, the GBI house warrant, it did allow any seizure for property inside Durk's property. So basically, after they established that Durk had shot into the air recklessly, they had a warrant to search the house, and they had a warrant to seize things from the house to aid in their investigation. And they seized the phone. They probably thought that the phone had evidence as to why Durk might be getting his home invaded, why he might have shot in the air recklessly, why a group of people might have come face-to-face inside Lil Durk's house and had guns drawn. So the prosecution would kind of clap back to that. Sorry, my bad. So, the judge would basically say that, look, that was allowed fair and square because Durk admitted he shot in the air. The defense said, well, the terms of the warrant didn't allow seizure of the phone. They said the cops went beyond the scope of the warrant to search the house. And there were some interesting examples given I'll give you in a minute. But before we get to that, the prosecution clapped back. They said that the government believes that the base of the warrant allowed the investigators to seize the phones fair and square based on Durk's reckless conduct. It said they did have probable cause to take the phone and search the property. They said the cops did the right thing. They did a fair two-step process. They first seized the phone, and they got the warrant to search the phone step by step, and there was, I believe, 5 weeks in between. They said the GBI acted in good faith, and independently of them, so did the FBI 4 years later. And so the defense kind of clapped back. They said, oh, well, that's not fair. You can't go beyond what's in a warrant. And I'll be honest, like, this was just a note that I had. Drew Findling looks a little bit bored at this point. He was kind of like spinning around in his chair. There were moments where Drew looked really locked in. And then there were other moments where he looked a little bit bored, like he wasn't really, not that he wasn't paying attention, but it was almost like he kind of knew how this was going to go. Or, to be honest, I feel like, in my opinion, like when certain issues are brought up, it feels to me like you can kind of tell how the judge is going to rule by just the way he starts talking. Like from the get-go, from the first couple sentences on this topic, it was like pretty obvious by the way he was talking that he wasn't gonna block this evidence from being shown. And it almost felt a little bit like there were times when people were going on and on and on and on trying to argue, and it's sort of like you can see the judge has made up his mind on this, and people want to have their grandstand moment, and obviously people wait their whole lives to be lawyers in big cases like this, so I get it. But it's like there was like big old speeches being made, and you could tell the judge was just looking like, bruh, like you wrap it up and I'm gonna just tell you no at the end of it. So Drew looked a little bit like, oh, we're going through the motions here, like probably looking a little bit frustrated that he could already tell, he's a veteran of this stuff, that phone ain't getting thrown out. So the defense basically said there's something called the plain view doctrine. They said if the cop sees something incriminating in plain view in the home, they can take it, but it has to be kind of like relevant to the potential crime. They basically said if they see a brick of cocaine in the home, they can take it, but a mobile phone, it could be anyone's mobile phone. You can't just seize everything. You can't just say, oh, you know, Ross's lip balm. I'm doing a search of Ross's home for a shooting that's gone down, and we see the lip balm. Let's take the lip balm. Like, there's no reason for you to take the lip balm. And she gave an example and said, well, if the phone's there and it pings off, and you see a text message that says, what's up with the bricks of cocaine, then maybe. Now, the judge kind of interrupted that and basically said, look, I get the point you're making. But like, what about the attenuation? He said, let me just get to the right page. He was like, what's actually the relevance of this? And the defense basically went back. They said, look, they took 5 weeks to get the phone warrant. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. If the government has permission, it's all well and good, but you can't just keep possessions forever. The time should be limited. They said you have to return or destroy an item or it eventually violates their Fourth Amendment rights. They said this is unconstitutional and you can't have a general warrant to just take everything for any reason. Now, the prosecution clapped back and they said on the topic of attenuation, they said, look, the GBI was investigating a shootout where the facts didn't add up. Durk shooting into the air recklessly didn't add up with what they thought was going on. So they said that they got a warrant for the phone. They searched the property. They took the phone. They didn't go through the phone until they got their second warrant. They got it fair and square. And they said it doesn't matter if Durk asked for his phone back a bunch of times. Waiting 5 weeks to get the phone warrant doesn't stop it in being in good faith. Arguably, it kind of made sense because it's like, oh, they took the phone and they didn't look at it for 5 weeks, or they didn't look at it for 5 years. It's like, well, they're doing things properly. They might have been looking into other aspects in the time that it took to look through that phone. So the things that they were trying to pull up as a defense weren't really working for them. And they basically just reiterated that just because it took 5 weeks to get the phone warrant doesn't stop it being done in good faith. They did it fair and square. They said the GBI acted in good faith. The FBI obtained the same information years later in good faith for different reasons that were good. And they said to punish the FBI when they had nothing to do with the GBI seizure of the phone doesn't make sense. And the judge basically said, look, I'll take this under submission. I will decide, but you should assume that I'm going to admit this evidence. And this was kind of, it got a little bit spicy because Durk's, I believe it was this female lawyer, said, oh, can I respond to that? And the judge cut her off, said, no, you may not. That's it. Done. I've said what nah, ain't no more going back and forth about this. So the judge was getting pretty feisty at certain points with Durk's team. And remember last time that we were in court, really the judge was getting pretty fiery and he was getting on the case of the prosecution. He wasn't as harsh to Durk's team as he was to the prosecution last time. And I think the judge, honestly, is completely fair. I think last time the prosecution were maybe pulling some moves they shouldn't have. They learned their lesson. This time they had their I's dotted, their T's crossed. Everything was in order. And Durk's team, they'd filed all these motions that were a little bit far-reaching, and the judge really wasn't going for it. So they basically went on to say, and this was very, very, very damning. Okay, and I think a lot of people have maybe missed out on this, or they've not even had time to pick up on this, but I'm going to tell you this right now. The judge said the FBI can continue to try and crack the phone, and if they crack the phone and get all the information off of it, he said, then we can decide what to do with that. It sounded like he would be willing to allow all of that information to be put forward if they do crack everything that's in the phone. And that's really bad news for Durk because he's already trying to get it thrown out based on this limited metadata. If the feds, and they are pretty good at this stuff, if the feds can get into everything and the judge is going to say, hey, let it run, that's going to be really bad news for Durk, and he's not getting another delay of trial. So that was bad. Anyway, all right, let's continue. So from there, okay, they basically said that, look, he's gonna make an official ruling on that later on, but he's like, you can assume that I'm going to allow that evidence to be put through. And you could kind of tell from the moment he started talking, he'd made his mind up. And the judge is very fair. He's extremely well versed in all different types of case law, and you know, he is not taking any bullshit. I've got to say, like, even in the David case, but this case too, like, I've found it so interesting to follow because it does just feel like you're just seeing people at the top of their game in the flesh. I've read about so many court cases and rulings, but to actually see a judge that's been doing this for years, taking in case law, firing on all cylinders. You got Brian Steele getting up there, firing off shots, you know, really on point. One of the best lawyers in the country, Drew Findling, billion-dollar lawyer, really doing his thing. And then the prosecution, who, frankly, they had a bad time last time I saw them, but this time they were on point. They had good answers for everything. The prosecution did a really, really good job today. I was very, very impressed. And it was like they took a mulligan on the last court date, and this time they had it booming. So very, very interesting to observe, to be completely honest with you. So after this, there was a motion to exclude a specific detective. I won't say their name, but I'm sure other people will report their name. But they basically said, this was, I can't lie to you. Drew Findling got up to present this part, and I always find it very interesting. The same in the David case. It's interesting which lawyers get up to present different things. Now, Brian Steele's probably got the most aura in that courtroom. He's like celebrity lawyer. He's Mr. Law, okay? It's actually impressive. Like, when Brian Steele walks in the courtroom, it's like straight aura. I can't lie, okay? Durk's whole team is very, very impressive. Obviously, the female lawyer that he's got, you know, she's a little bit more low-key. And then Drew Findling, he's more like the sage. He's kind of older. He's got the longer hair. He's kind of like a little bit more of a chilled out. Brian Steele's more like straight-cut professional. Drew Findling's almost like the oracle of law. That's the way I'm going to put it, right? He's like the legal oracle. And so when he got up for an opportunity to talk, it was very interesting, and you really take notice when Drew has something to say. Now, I noticed a couple of genius moves that Drew played that, I'll be honest, they didn't really work. Actually, no, they might have. Honestly, they might have worked. Just like how I saw Blair Burke in the David trial, be very smart about the words she was using, the placement of words, the sentence structure. I ain't gonna lie, I saw Drew Findling pull some super slick moves in that courtroom. So he got up there, and this was all on a motion to exclude a certain detective from Chicago, I believe, that they don't want to testify. And they basically Drew Findling got up there and low-key, without saying it, made a bargain to basically say, if that detective is allowed, if you guys withdraw that detective, then we'll withdraw our like artistic music, drill music expert. All right? They said both the names. I won't say the names, but yeah. So the judge basically butted in and said, well, look, most likely I'm going to allow both of them to be used, but you can make your argument. So Drew Findling starts arguing. He says they basically believe that this detective was added to make this a Chicago gang case. He said, look, you've done this after the Vicar Chicago murder was severed from the LA murder. He said you've been making this, and this is I gotta lie, this was genius. If this was intentional, this was genius. They said you've been trying to make this case OTF and GD related to the Chicago gangs. Now I'm thinking, OTF BDs, right? OTF are black disciples. They're beefing with the GDs, the gangster disciples. The Vicar murder, they were having a GD Stefan Mack killed, and they're talking about Durk has bounties on any GD in Chicago. Why is he saying BD? Well, this was smart. He planted a seed that was going to sprout later on. I ain't going to lie, Drew Findling, this was genius. It didn't work, but this was genius. He planted doubt. And if he can do this at trial, if any more of, like, this is the type of thing that when I saw Blair Burke do it against David, she would plant just like a little something. She'd say something in a certain way. And then when they responded, she was able to clap back, and it was like, oh, you laid a trap. So Drew Findling said this has been OTF and GD related to Chicago. The government said it's an OTF case until this detective came along. And then they said King Von, it's all about King Von and the GDs and the gang war. And they said, but King Von was killed in Atlanta, not Chicago. They said there's no evidence that King Von's death was anything to do with the Chicago gang war. They said that the evidence says, and this was world exclusive. This was crazy. I sat up in the courtroom when I heard this. How long have we been arguing about what was the reason that Lil Durk and King Von were beefing with Quando Rondo and NBA Youngboy? It's been argued about endlessly. My boy Remo, we've been going back and forth about this for years. What is the actual reason that King Von had a beef with Youngboy? Well, perhaps the most interesting thing that came up, they said, Drew Findling admitted in front of the whole court for the whole world to see for the first time ever, he said, all right, there's no evidence that King Von was killed due to his beefs and his gang wars in Chicago. He said there is evidence that is going to be presented that says that the dispute between Quando Rondo and King Von that got him killed was about a girlfriend and music clearance. Now, everybody's been saying for years, what was it really about? There's rumors that it was about Blasian Doll. Sorry, there's rumors it was about Asian Doll, excuse me. There was rumors that it was about, there was some other girl called Lil Blue or something that they were beefing over with Youngboy and that kind of thing. There was rumors that King Von was finessed into thinking he was getting a verse from Youngboy by a random person online. Rumors that he had a song with Youngboy. Youngboy wouldn't clear the verse. This is the first time we've heard it. And this comes out of Drew Findling's mouth. I believe it. He said that the beef that got King Von killed with Quando Rondo was about girlfriends and music clearance. Crazy, okay? So he went on to say, and I'm running out of breath here, but let me energize myself. He went on to say that Quando Rondo was shot in Blackshear, Georgia. This has nothing to do with Chicago. None of this is to do with Chicago gangs, so why do you need a Chicago detective to come and talk about this? They said Lil Pab's murder was in LA. And the victims that were being targeted, Quando, Lil Pab, and anyone they were with, they're from Savannah, Georgia. King Von was killed in Atlanta, Georgia. He said that, Drew Findling said, I feel that this detective, this expert, is adding to the Vicar elements of the Chicago beef, and basically, it's irrelevant. And again, right at the end, he was very slick, and he basically offered, right? He basically said, look, we'll withdraw our expert if you withdraw your gang expert, right? Now, I personally think that that was a genius move, purely because, let's be real, I think that this expert is going to be way more damning than Durk's defense expert is going to be at absolving him, okay? So I think Drew making this wager, because really the feds have a lot more to lose in losing this witness. But this was actually like something that the judge was kind of on the fence about. So after this, the prosecution had their opportunity to reply, and this was really, really interesting. So when the prosecution replied, they basically said Drew Findling is well, the defense, but this was clapping back at Drew. They said that Drew was mischaracterizing this detective's role in this, and basically they were mischaracterizing the detective's role and what he was going to present. They said the government has, from the very start, made this an indictment about OTF being the criminal organization. They said, we brought up this expert in 2025 before the Vicar charges, before the superseding indictment that got severed, before the Stephon Mack murder. This detective was going to be part of this the whole time. And they said that the government believed that a subset of OTF was a gang that Durk was leading. Now, here's the thing. There was a lot of talk about gangster disciples in Drew's segment, and we're thinking, if you're smart and you followed this, you're thinking Durk's a black disciple, OTF's a black disciple subset. OTF is only Trey folks. The Treys is the threes, the gates, the three, they throw up the three. It's the black disciples, all right? The three pillars is a big thing with the black disciples. They throw up the three, all right? The Treys, right? And if you don't like the black disciples, you crack the Treys, you diss in the Treys, all right? OTF is only Trey folks, not only the fact, come on. Only the Family's the record label, only Trey folks is the gang. It's a superset of black disciples, Trey folks. Right? Catch up with me. So anyway, what's really interesting is even the way that Drew Findling mentioned the GDs rather than the BDs, the Trey folks, this kind of cornered the government. So the government were careful not to bring up the BDs. So they said the government believed a subset of OTF was the gang Durk was leading. Now, really, I think what they meant to say was that OTF was a subset of the black disciples that Durk was leading. But because Drew Findling had just talked about GD, no BD, I think in an attempt not to confuse the government, the state kind of didn't say what Durk was doing as a gang leader in a damning enough way as they should have or could have, right? This was very interesting. So they basically went on to say the defense is going to say that OTF was purely a musical collective, and that's not right. And then the judge clapped back, and this was where you could see the genius of Drew Findling. So the judge clapped back and basically said, look, and this is why Drew is genius, because he basically took his witness, which is low-key shoddy, in my opinion, right, a shoddier witness than the government's detective witness, okay? This is somebody that's a real Chicago gang expert that's worked as a detective, and according to this, has literally arrested Lil Durk for gang activity in the past, all right? Or arrested Lil Durk in the past as a gang expert. I don't know what arrest it was for. This is like some kind of musical gang drill expert that's probably more like a scholar that's you know, analyzed drill music and its impact in Chicago. I would say that just on the balance, in my opinion, on the balance of probabilities, I think that the state's witness is more powerful than Durk's counter witness. But by likening the two together and Drew Findling saying, well, if you withdraw yours, we'll withdraw ours, the judge kind of like bit onto that a little bit. So the judge said, look, both of these witnesses, they rise and fall together here. The judge said, look, I would like both sides to submit what they're going to say to these witnesses, and I will decide. He says, I often let both in here, and he says his style, if you saw the last video I did, that judge's whole style is like, I want to let everybody say what they got to say and let the jury decide. That's how I want to kind of play it. But he said, but look, I might strike both of them. And he kind of kept talking about, look, we got 35 witnesses. Like, and if you saw the previous video I did, I was talking about how they basically when they said that we got 35 witnesses, the judge was like, 35? Like, what? I mean, he said he was in shock. Okay. So the judge was like, I might strike both of them. I might allow both of them. So what was really interesting is the judge said, submit to me what they're going to talk about and I'll decide both. Now, this is why this was genius of Drew Findling. Because if this gang expert that's a Chicago gang expert that's locked up Lil Durk before can basically attest to the gang membership, the Black Disciples, the Only Trey folks, the OTF's a gang, it's been a gang for decades, all this kind of stuff, right? They're going to have to submit all of that to the judge. But then Drew Findling is now going to be able to take his expert witness. He can put reams and reams of nonsense, right? And he can say, well, this is all the stuff this person's going to talk about drill music, the inception of drill music, the sociological backstory of drill music and rap beefs and how rap beefs are all made up and it's WWE wrestling. And since the judge has kind of latched onto both of these things together, the judge might go, look, this is voluminous. This is too much. Fuck it. Strike both of these. And then a really good prosecution witness is going to go down the drain with potentially, I'm not attacking the credibility of the defense witness here, but it's a defense witness that's probably not doing as much heavy lifting as the prosecution. It's like a counter that's probably not heavy enough to balance the scales evenly, right? If that makes sense. So the Drew lumping those in together and the judge basically being like, bro, we've only got so long. Like, what are they going to talk about? If Drew crams loads and loads of stuff in there, the judge is going to go, this is too much, we're going to get rid of both of them. Very, very interesting strategy. It was low-key genius. I was like, wow. And so after that, all right, it's like, it was genius because it's like they've essentially, I don't know the validity of what this witness is going to say, but if they're not the best expert witness, it's like they have managed to associate their expert witness, who might not be that good, with the prosecution's expert witness, who could be absolutely perfect. Now, here is where the genius came. Okay, after all of that was said, Drew Findling stood up, all right, and he said, I just want to apologize. I erroneously said that Durk was GD instead of BD. He said, sorry about that. And he said, but this is the exact kind of confusion that the jury are going to be struggling with, you know, with all these witnesses giving both sides. He said, I said GD instead of BD. This is exactly what I'm talking about. And I was like, wow, that was genius. That was genius. It was like the intentional confusion. I don't know if it was intentional. Could have been a genuine mistake, but the end result was the same. He kept saying GD. Yeah, you know, the GD gang war. And he's like, oh, sorry, I meant BD. Well, you see how confusing it gets. It was like, ooh, that was a smart move. That was a smooth move. I ain't going to lie. That one was like, whoa, okay. Okay. So after this, the judge basically said, submit everything that they're going to say and I'll weigh it up, but I'm leaning towards having them both in there. And I think that that's going to be bad for Durk, to be honest with you, okay? Now, what is interesting, and they did say that this was a detective that had arrested Durk in the past, but that information wouldn't be included, basically, I believe. So after that, there was kind of this big aside, and to be honest, this was, I'm not going to be disrespectful, but this was kind of one of the sort of most drawn out parts of the hearing, and I think a lot of people in the courtroom were kind of like finding this part to really drag a lot. Obviously, one of the co-defendants, Lindsay, he was trying to be excluded, and basically his lawyer was trying to argue that, you know, he had joined the conspiracy for one day, and look, I'll be clear. I feel like a lot of the co-defendants and Durk's defense looked very uncomfortable during this hearing. Now, I don't know for sure, but I wonder if the way that this lawyer for Lindsay put this information across made it sound a little bit like, I don't want to say telling, but made it sound a little bit like he was kind of like trying to save himself and maybe by accident hang the other guys out to dry. Because he basically kind of went across and explained like, look, we basically want to argue that, like, because Lindsay, he was a one-day participant in this conspiracy. He was hired in to be a hitman on the 18th of August, and his involvement in the conspiracy ended on the 19th. Now, it felt a little bit like he was doing a little bit too much of almost just like, I would have thought the other co-defendants would be like, yo, what conspiracy? What hitman? Like, we all denying this. You're trying to say, oh, I was only involved in as a one-day hitman. But, like, you're supposed to be denying this shit ever happened. The lawyer talked a little bit too long. It felt like he said a little bit too much. And it seemed like everybody was getting frustrated, to be honest with you. I think this is my opinion, I thought Brian Steele looked a little pretty irritated that this lawyer for Lindsay was talking and talking, basically trying to make this argument that, like, yo, he was only part of a small part. He was, like, as a hired hitman for one day, and he's not, you know, the prosecution tried to say that he entered the conspiracy as he found it. He was like, he didn't really know what was going on. He didn't participate. His ongoing involvement wasn't an admission of being involved, and it was kind of a little bit like, yeah, the way you're wording things right now is it's like, you're not making an admission that he was involved, but it's like, you're almost acknowledging that this was a real thing by saying that he was only involved for one day. And it looked like everybody was a bit irritated, and it was almost like, yo, like, have we really got our story straight? That's just my opinion. Some people might disagree with me, but that was the sense that I got. So basically, the judge said, look, it's reasonable if someone joins the conspiracy late that they would later make post-murder statements as part of a cleanup, still being complicit in the conspiracy. Now, this was very interesting, okay? And then basically was like a massive breakdown from Lindsay's lawyer. And he basically, he challenged the validity of the participating witnesses, so the alleged rats, snitches, whatever you want to call them. He said that, look, they've taken proffers. They're basically going along with whatever the government has to say because they're trying to save themselves. They're taking proffer agreements. They don't have an incentive to correct the government if things are said that are wrong about Lindsay. They mentioned Doody Lowe a couple times. They said that there was a Doody Lowe text to thread messages that he was on, that basically predated his involvement in the conspiracy, but it said he was silent. It says his silence in messages that were spread in 2020 and 2021 shouldn't be a concession. If he was in a group chat with Doody Lowe ain't charged in this indictment. So they basically said that shouldn't be taken as a concession in the conspiracy. And again, it was just kind of like, it seemed like everybody else on the defense side was like getting irritated, like, yo, like, what conspiracy, bro? Like, what conspiracy? Like, what are you doing? That's just how it felt from what I was noticing. So from there, they basically said, it needs to have a declaration regarding the conspiracy. He didn't declare his involvement in the conspiracy. Just being in a group chat and not saying anything doesn't mean that he was part of the planning. It says his statements don't indicate any involvement in the conspiracy. Like, basically trying to say, look, there ain't no evidence of me being on the conspiracy. And I just the body language of everyone in the courtroom was kind of like, yeah, what conspiracy? And this guy talked for a long time. So basically, they explained that there were these jail calls where people said, I think these were the calls where people said they were smoking on Pab or whatever, and they said that these fell out of the conspiracy's life, the life cycle of the conspiracy. They said a conspiracy doesn't continue just because the members of that conspiracy continue speaking about other stuff. And it says that they want to drop the Booney Mo and Doody Lowe message group chats that they were in. Even the messages, and this didn't really make sense. There's obviously a message thread where they basically say like, oh, he's going to snitch soon, clear as day. The ATF are asking questions. And it's like, that sounds like you ongoing protecting this conspiracy to me, but like he's trying to say, this wasn't ongoing proof of stalking. The questions, the statement that the ATF were asking questions, isn't necessarily a cover up for murder. It could be something else. So it's like, it's an interesting point, but it's like, again, you're kind of acknowledging a conspiracy maybe where it shouldn't be acknowledged. I don't know. And then they said, like, he was on a VIP list for some of Durk's concerts. And they said, look, that's not proof of a furtherance of a conspiracy. They said the cooperators gave statements in the hopes of a proffer. So they're basically just doing whatever they've got to do, throwing Lindsay under the bus, where potentially he doesn't deserve to be thrown under the bus. So that's not really going to hold up. Like, if the feds are going to stick with this angle that, like, VIP access to Durk's show, features on Durk's albums, etc., were part of the conspiracy, and a part of the bounty reward for participating in this murder for hire, that's not really going to help. Anyway, he's kind of arguing that, and again, it's just kind of like, okay, there was a lot of information broadcast that was just kind of like stuff that I've not seen anyone else acknowledge. Like, I'd say most of Durk's defense and motions, it's like, oh, that evidence not valid, throw that out, we don't acknowledge that, like, we don't believe the lyrics, like, that. Durk's, can't lie, like Durk's defense, especially when it comes to the lyrics, is like playing deaf, dumb, blind, and mute. Like, just like, no, we don't, the lyrics got nothing to do with anything. He's got a D-Sang t-shirt on. There's no such thing as Slide for Von. Whereas this was like, there was low key just a couple of times where it felt like, yo, you're kind of acknowledging the conspiracy here in a way to try and get your specific client out of it. But like everybody else, what are you trying to say about them? So, they basically asked for like prior out-of-court statements from participating witness 123 not be used against Lindsay specifically. It said he's charged with stalking, conspiracy, and the murder. It says that the stalking of Lil Pab started and ended on August the 18th and August the 19th, 2022. It says he was hired for a one-day job on August the 18th, and they can't prove that he was knowingly joining the 3-year conspiracy. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, his defense saying he was hired for a one-day job is like, huh? Like, what job? What, like, hired? Like, Durk and them, they're trying to be like, no one's hired for anything. This never happened. This is just this is a nothing. So, again, I felt like everybody, like, even Brian Steele was, like, looking at the guy like, right. See, and I've written in my notes here, like, Brian Steele, he looked kind of stressed and annoyed when this lawyer was speaking, and he kept talking. And it was like, he was kind of making admission. It was just like, everybody else is acting like this never happened. And this lawyer, on behalf of Lindsay, was kind of like, yeah, he was only hired for one day. Like, what do you mean hired for one day? For what? Like, for the murder. It wasn't great. So, Drew Findling looked fed up. This guy kept, like, Lindsay's lawyer kept speaking. He kind of talked in circles for quite a long time. He made a lot of the same points again and again, but like, clearly I get he was fighting on behalf of his client. He was trying to drive the point home, but it did feel, that felt like the most uncomfortable, drawn out part of the courtroom. He said that he wasn't asking for concessions on Lindsay's statement, only concessions on his membership and furtherance of the conspiracy. And they basically said that, like, and again, this was like, just, it's like, you're admitting too much. They said 3 defendants were on trial here. David Lindsay was a one-day participant, but was being accused of being part of a 3-year conspiracy. Now, at the end of all this, like, the judge even joked, because he was talking for so long uninterrupted, the judge joked and was like, oh, I thought you were about to be done. And he was like, oh, I'm nearly done. He was like, yeah, can you give me the big wind-up? And literally everyone in the courtroom laughed. Because the guy had been talking for so long and everyone looked so uncomfortable. So after that, the prosecution clapped back and they said, look, on August the 18th, Lindsay joined a big, long conspiracy. They said he's trying to remove every point before and after he participated in it, but he joined the conspiracy as he found it, and the trial will determine if it was a conspiracy and if Lindsay participated. And again, it was like, bro, you kind of like, you inferred from a lot of what you just said that it was a conspiracy and you joined it, but only for a day. Like, I was only in the conspiracy for a day. Like, So the judge says, look, it's clear the government seems to think the conspiracy and OTF are all the same thing. And they said, yeah, it's like, the judge basically was like, look, a conspiracy can continue long after the murder. He can join the conspiracy as he found it, and the conspiracy can continue onwards, like, in perpetuity until we caught you. The prosecution said, look, statements between the co-conspirator were giving updates on the conspiracy and furtherance of the conspiracy, like hinting towards, you know, the messages about, oh, the cops are asking questions, blood's ready to snitch soon. Like, you all in a group chat furthering the conspiracy, talking about who's going to snitch and talking about they can't break us. And so the judge said, look, I'm going to take this under submission. I'm going to look at the statements and decide if they're relevant to the conspiracy. And he didn't rule on that. And it was a little bit like, bruh, like, I would feel like if you was Durk and the other guys and you went back in there afterwards, you'd be like, yo, what's up with your lawyer? Like, given the conspiracy so much weight that it's even real, acknowledging the reality of the conspiracy was like low-key contrary. And it was like, I felt like Brian still was shooting daggers at the guy, but that's just I could have misinterpreted it, right? So anyway, that's basically the meat and potatoes of everything that went down, and we got a few updates. So they basically said next week they're going to be doing jury selection. There's a lot of jurors that they're trying to get through. They're summoning 80 jurors. Usually it's 40, but they're going to get through a lot of people. They're going to probably disqualify a lot of people. I'll just get my spot stickers. I'm feeling nice. I feel like my skin's been awful. Don't know why. I've been eating good and sleeping good as well. But anyway, they basically said 80 jurors have been summoned. It's usually 40, but they've got a lot of people to get through. The judge and the government and the defense, you know, they'll be able to basically go over the indictment. They'll basically like introduce the lawyers and the defendants. They'll put the jurors under oath. They'll swear them in. They'll give them all a questionnaire. All parties can review their questionnaires, determine if any of the jurors are unqualified. They're going to try and have like, I think 24 jurors total. So there's like, you know, ones if some of them drop out, they got spares. And they basically said like 50 of 80 will actually be in the court physically. And then they'll basically got both sides will get 30 minutes to ask the jurors questions. And then they'll basically like get opening statements that will be an hour each once the trial starts. They said that could be one lawyer speaking for an hour, or it could be all split up. Drew could talk for 20 minutes, Brian could talk for 20 minutes, etc. And basically, in spite of the fact that this was going to be the last hearing, apparently there's going to be another hearing next week, pre-trial, to follow up. And then the last thing that they talked about was jury anonymity. So the judge basically said, look, I'm going to be limiting the names of the jury. None of the defendants can have the names of any jury members, but the counsel can have them. He said that the protective order that names can't be shared with the client stands. They said that the government wants the names to be kept from the lawyers of the defendants. And the judge was really interesting. He said, look, I've just done a really serious gang case against the gang Florencia 13, and said that basically that was a way more vicious case with way nastier shit in it. And we ran it the same way, and we still didn't keep the names of the jurors away from the defense lawyers, and basically said that, look, nothing in this case has got anywhere near as much violence as that, and there was no problems, there was no threats to the jurors. And he said, look, there's been no evidence to suggest OTF or Durk are a danger to the general public or lay people or jurors. Really, it's like, this is a vicious gang beef between gangsters and people involved in this. So after it all wrapped up, Durk smiled, he hugged his lawyer. They basically confirmed that there would be another court date in the next week or so. And that's everything. So, it wasn't a great day for Durk, but it wasn't like a humongous L. I would say that the prosecution definitely had their I's dotted and their T's crossed much more than last time that we saw them. They were taking things very seriously. I think a lot of people were huffing the copium after the last time that Lil Durk got this massive W, purely because it's just like, oh, it's a W, he's going to beat this now. But this was kind of definitely a harsh reminder that, like, this isn't a OTF judge. This is a judge that's very fair. You know, that week the government hadn't come with the best arguments and Durk had. This week it seemed like the government had decent arguments, Durk's team didn't have the best arguments, and really the judge was being very fair and basically said, I want to get all the evidence out on the table and let the jury decide. So that's everything that I've got. Okay, I hope you found that a good update. I will keep you guys updated if I hear anything more, and I just want to say I appreciate you guys trusting me to report on this. I will see you guys in the next video. I'm out for now. Peace.